I don't remember the exact moment the color bled out. It wasn't a dramatic shift, no sudden monochrome wash. It was more like a quiet, insidious draining, a slow desaturation that only became noticeable when I stopped looking directly at it. The hydrangeas in Mrs. Davison's front garden, once a vibrant cerulean, now held a shade that existed somewhere between blue and an abstract concept of not blue enough. Life on Maple Lane had always been defined by its unremarkable nature. We lived in one of those developments where every house seemed to have been assembled from the same blueprint, painted in variations of beige and muted earth tones. My wife, Sarah, and I had moved here 7 years ago, drawn by the quiet, the predictable school runs, the friendly waves from neighbors who'd lived here for decades. Even the crack in the sidewalk outside number 17, a landmark of sorts, felt like a reliable, permanent fixture. Our days unfolded with a gentle rhythm, coffee on the porch, the distant drone of lawnmowers on Saturdays, the familiar glow of porch lights at dusk. It was the kind of normalcy that lulled you into a sense of absolute security, a belief that the world outside our immediate sphere was as solid and unchanging as the foundations beneath our feet. The first concrete shift I noticed was the geometry. It began with the mailboxes. Ours, a standard black metal box, started to feel off. Not bent, not damaged, but as if the angle at which it met the post had subtly changed, becoming too sharp, too precise. Then, the houses themselves. Looking down Maple Lane, the uniform pitch of the roof seemed to sharpen, the eaves becoming impossibly crisp, almost chiseled. It was as if a poorly rendered CGI filter had been applied to our street, but only to the parts that were supposed to be naturally imperfect. One afternoon, I was walking home, and I saw Mr. Henderson trimming his hedge. The shears moved with an unnatural, jerky fluidity, each cut perfectly aligned with the ghost of a previous cut, creating a hedge that looked less like a living plant and more like a meticulously constructed architectural model. Later that week, Sarah pointed out the patterns on our driveway. She said the expansion joint seemed to be forming a more intricate, almost tessellated design than usual. I dismissed it, of course, attributing it to the summer heat and an overactive imagination. But the feeling persisted, a low thrum of dissonance beneath the surface of the everyday. The unsettling events began to compound, each a tiny tear in the fabric of our reality. Sarah started to complain that things were disappearing. Not valuable items, but small, insignificant objects. A single gardening glove from the shed. A specific set of coasters. The remote control, which we always left on the coffee table, was found tucked away in a kitchen drawer. We'd search, and then inexplicably, they'd reappear in plain sight, sometimes in places we'd already checked. It was like a poorly executed prank, except there was no one to prank us. I started to notice that the shadows cast by the trees no longer seemed to follow the sun's arc. They remained static, unnaturally defined, like stencils cut into the pavement. One evening, I walked to the end of our driveway, just to get the mail. The entire street, usually lined with familiar parked cars, was empty. Not a single vehicle. It wasn't like a holiday where everyone went away. It was a pristine, unnerving absence. The air itself felt thicker, quieter. There was a profound stillness that no natural environment should possess. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was expectant, like a held breath. I remember calling out, a tentative hello, into the void, and the sound seemed to die before it traveled more than a few feet. Sarah, too, was feeling it. She started sleeping with the hall light on, her usual composed demeanor fraying at the edges. She'd stand by the window, staring out at the identical, unnervingly uniform houses, her brow furrowed in a way I'd never seen before. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was out in the yard, attempting to mow the lawn, though the mower itself seemed to stutter, as if its mechanics were struggling against an invisible resistance. I looked up at our house, at our perfectly manicured, unnervingly precise lawn. And that's when I saw it. The bricks on the side of our house, the ones facing the street, were no longer uniform. They were subtly, horrifyingly, shifting. Not in color, but in their arrangement. The mortar lines seemed to be subtly rearranging themselves, creating new, almost alien patterns. The window frames, which had always been a standard white, were now a shade that was distinctly not white. I dropped the mower, the engine sputtering into silence. I walked towards the house, my feet crunching on the unnaturally uniform blades of grass. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched the brick. It felt solid, real. But as I looked closer, I saw that the brick beneath my fingertips was subtly morphing, its edges softening, its texture subtly altering to match the new, unnerving pattern that was emerging. I looked back down Maple Lane. The houses, the trees, the perfectly paved road, they were all exhibiting the same subtle, terrifying distortion. It wasn't just the street that was changing, it was our perception of it, or perhaps, the street itself was asserting a new, alien form of reality upon us. Sarah came out onto the porch, her eyes wide. She didn't speak, just pointed down the street. And there, at the very end, where the familiar curve of the road met the distant woods, the entire landscape seemed to be folding in on itself, the trees contorting into impossible shapes, the sky a flat, unblemished gradient of what could only be described as absence. We stood there, on our porch, watching the world we knew dissolve. The precise angles of our neighbor's roof began to blur, not into softness, but into a sharper, more aggressive geometric configuration. The hydrangeas, which had long since lost their vibrant color, now seemed to pulse with an inner, uniform luminescence, a sterile glow that offered no warmth. Sarah reached for my hand, her grip tight, her knuckles white. I looked at her familiar face, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, I wondered if even she was still entirely herself. The quiet of Maple Lane, once a comfort, was now a vast, deafening expanse. What happens when the very ground beneath your feet asserts a different truth? What do you think is happening on Maple Lane? Let me know in the comments below.